My name is Ingmar. I'm one of the test automation engineers for the WMS project. A bit about me. As I said, I'm the test automation engineer at one of the WMS teams. I work for bol.com now for about 1.5 years, and I'm specialized in setting up a custom test automation framework in Java 1.8. First a question, who's into test automation of this group? It's quite a bit. I won't show any code, I will just talk about how did we incorporate test automation within the teams and what did we learn from that. For those who are not involved in any test activities, a few terms. Matthew explained, we use a WMS, the warehouse management system, which is a software that acts like the background for all the items that you put in, all the orders. Then we have the regression test. Every feature that you build or that a developer builds can break potentially another part of your system. So your regression test just checks if the system still works if you introduce another feature. And then we have the end-to-end test that tests the entire business flow of your entire project. Test automation. Of course, we have manual testing, just one person sitting behind the computer running the test script manually. But the last decade we are shifting more towards test automation, which is essentially a tool or some custom code talking to an external system. All the tests that the test automation does are predefined by a test engineer or by the business. So every time the exact same test is run. A big advantage is that it's fast, it's reliable. You do the same test every time over and over again. It's a complementary to manual testing. Even though you have tested a lot of automated tests, you will still do some manual testing to check the end. And finally, which is a basic challenge, being in test automation requires quite some IT maturity for the company. And you need resources for it, you need the knowledge for it, you need the machines for it. So what is going on with test automation? What do we need for it? You need to know about the domain you are in. What is the language that the business uses? You need to know about the warehouse. What is an item? What is storage? What is picking an item? How do I pack? Those are business requirements, but how is that related to the WMS that you use? How is the domain mapped to the WMS? Which words do you use? The WMS that we use has a database under it. It has hundreds and hundreds of tables. You need to know at least a bit where in the database you can find your data that you are looking for. The WMS doesn't run on itself. There's a big architecture behind it. You have a lot of service behind it. It also talks to the bol.com landscape, all the different machines in the warehouse, the different packing machines, the conveyor belts. It all has to talk to that, and you need to know how it talks to those machines. If you know a bit of those subjects, you can combine it with your test automation skills to build a trustworthy automation regression test. This is one of our dashboards that we use in bol.com. Of course, I made a screenshot where everyone on the screen. Everyone in the team or in the building has access to these dashboards, so everyone can see which the test failed or passed, when, and why, and how. So every morning, this is what we first want to see. Some metrics. How many tests do we have? We make this distinction between inbound process and outbound process. We are running about 20 end-to-end tests for inbound, 30 for outbound. Inbound starts with delivering the goods at the warehouse to storage, and outbound starts from storage with an order to delivering it to personnel for delivery to the customer. Until now, I made about 20,000 lines of Java code, all custom. The software that we use is custom. I have to do a lot of database queries, custom messages to the WMS system, a lot of assertions. So in a couple of months, that grew enormously to that amount. Automated regression test runs every night on the test environment and the acceptance environment, and we can run it every time we want it on any deployment or any environment. Before we had test automation for this project, it took 2 people 3 full days to do it. Now we reduce it to 1 hour. The regression test that we made, or that we designed, is leading, the results of them are leading into the deployment decisions. If the regression test passes, then we have a pretty good chance that we will deploy the changes to production. If there's an error, we will never deploy it. So it's leading in that case. Who do we have in our team? We have the developers. They develop the new features, and they're developing only on the development environment, and they run their own test there. When they think a feature is done, they move it to the test environment, where the consultants can do their manual testing, and where I can start designing my test automation test scripts. And when everything is done, all the tests pass on the test environment, we can put it on the acceptance environment for the business analysts to check the requirements that are created or fulfilled. So how do we come up with those tests? We can test functionally or technically. First of all, we have the input by the developers who know how to translate the requirements to code or to the WMS system. For example, database queries, messages that are sent to other systems, perhaps messages that have to be returned to the system. And of course, we have the functional tests that have to pass. Can all the screens be entered? Can I enter the correct codes? Are all the screens connected? Don't I see an error message popping up? And you can try to test, make tests for all your requirements, but we decided to do some risk analysis on what requirements do we have, and how hard is it, and what is the risk if that requirement is not fulfilled in production. You can think of how often is this requirement used in the warehouse. For example, delivery of a truck is used 100 times a day, so that at least has to work. Another another example for risk analysis is the complexity of your implementation code. The more complex the implementation is, the more test effort you have to put into it. All the tests that we made use the same processes. It's all inbound or outbound, and all tests are data-driven. So we create a data set and we put it into the test code, and it runs for us. Sometimes I get a question, do you cover everything in your test? That's a question a lot of testers get. Test automation is not there to cover everything. It only repeats what you want to test. It doesn't create assertions for you. And there are a lot of different ways to calculate your coverage. All those test designs are converted into the custom Java test framework, which is built in Selenium, which is a user interface test tool, and some external supporting libraries. Storytime. I will tell 2 use cases that went wrong in production and how we how we reacted on that with respect to the test automation. So one morning I came into the office and like the entire team was not there. They were all in the emergency room because something went wrong in production, and everyone had to sit down to recreate the issue that happened. So it was pretty quiet on the floor. So I started to do my own work. I was a bit behind with some tests, so I created the last test that had to be done. To my surprise, the test that I created failed, and there was no one to talk to, so I put it in Jira, or internal system. 10 minutes later, I got a message from Matthew that the issue I logged was pretty much equal to the emergency that we were just trying to recreate. So what happens? One of the requirements was, say I'm on screen X and I press on button Y, then I have to go to some actions, C1, C2, C3 have to be there. And one of the tests was if I'm on screen X and before I was on screen W, and then I press on the button Y, then the action on C1, C2, C3, C4. And that test was actually also a requirement. Yeah, the consultants recreated the test. They concluded that indeed was an emergency issue, and about an hour later it was deployed to production because it was fixed. But it makes you wonder what happened there. How could that test be forgotten? Why was it even in production? Why was it even on the staging environment, and why was it picked up before? If we had looked correctly at the requirements, it was there. We knew what that had to be done, but somehow we missed it. But the automated regression test pulled it while it was already in production, and that was the signal for us that the automated test had to be part of the definition of done of the story or the functionality we're creating. So any feature that we build, we think of the test that we want to automate, and we only go to the next environment if those tests pass. Second story, it works fine for us, let's go to production. Matthew just explained that the warehouse can run on two work modes, one with conveyor belts and one without conveyor belts. Conveyor belts are a different system, and it can happen that there's a technical issue there, so we can't use it. If we can't use it, then we switch to the other mode, plan B. And one morning we got a new emergency ticket that somehow data from plan A, from the actual, when the actual work mode was put into the plan B work mode, and the system executed. So there was a mix-up between plan A and plan B inside the system, and it was all mixed up. It took quite some time for the consultants to A, find out what happened, and B, to clean up the mess that it made in the system. So first we wanted to go to production at 12 o'clock, then at 1 o'clock, at 2 o'clock. It took quite some time, and at the end we had a solution. It was tested by 3 independent consultants, and they say we agreed, or they agreed, it works for us. We have tested it, works great. We don't have time to go to the automation test because people are waiting in the warehouse. Of course, as a test automation engineer, you should, of course, advise what your test does. So, if you don't run your test automatically, you still have a risk that something can fail. Yeah, that one was comprehended. We still went to production. About an hour later, I got a message that the fix was rolled back to all the environments. So also on the test environment that I use. And I decided to start the automated regression test just for completeness sake. And about half of all the tests failed that were touching that part. What happened is the test didn't fail on the feature that we just fixed. It didn't fail on the feature that came after it. It failed on the feature that came after that. So even though the consultants tested a lot of the feature that we fixed, later in the process it failed as well. So that was a lesson for us. Always run your automated regression test. Even if somebody says I tested manually, I have confidence it works good, we have to go on. Always run your regression tests. We run out of time, no, you always run your regression tests, period. So that day we also learned the true value of your regression tests, and everyone in the team knew it. So conclusion, food for thought. Involve your entire team in the existence and the value of your automated regression test. They don't need to know how you implement it, what it does, but they need to know it's there and what it's for. If you're building something, be pretty sure you understand the product risk. How can the feature that we're building break? What is the impact on the fulfillment if it breaks? And in the end, as proven, the test automation that we created at Boldecon for the GFC paid itself back. That's it. Thank you. Any questions? Yeah.
Oh, bring the microphone.
When you're mentioning risk, you mentioned
Yeah.
the complexity of code. Would you
Yeah.
like to explain more about that? What code, what complexity?
Yeah, for example, something that can be in requirements, in terms of functional requirements, quite straightforward. It doesn't have to be straightforward in terms of code. You can think in the amount of lines of code that were used for that feature, how many loops, how many branches, all different signs in the amount of effort that you have to put in your testing, not just in automated testing, but also in manual testing. Is that an answer to your question?
To an extent, but then the follow-up would be, do you take a decision on that and judge the complexity? Do you take a developer's input? Or
No, it's a mutual decision. The developer knows all about what he built, and he can tell you about it, how hard or how difficult it was to make it custom. So based on that, you make an agreement on how much effort you can take put into it. Thank you.
Any more questions?
Thank you. I wonder what is the ratio between the amount of time put into writing the test and writing the code itself? Because sometimes customers they think they don't need tests because they will take a long time to write.
So you're asking how long will it take to implement the tests?
Yeah, compared to how long it will take to write the code, like one-to-one.
Yeah. It depends. All the code that I wrote last year is with the thought of being reusable. So if I make a code for one screen that I will hit again, that code is still written once, so I can reuse it every time. So yeah, it depends on the variation of the test. If it's a complete new feature or a variation, then it's one-to-one that I have to make some custom coding for it. Okay.
Thank you. More questions?
Yeah, I would like to know, you showed us the number of end-to-end tests you do.
Yeah.
I can imagine there's a lot more testing, automated testing in front of that, like unit testing, integration testing. Can you tell us something about it?
Also referred as the test automation pyramid, if you're familiar with that term. You can do your test on a lot of levels. You have unit testing, you have your system testing, and end-to-end testing is all at the very top. It's also the most fragile testing because The test can take about 5 minutes, for example, but it fails in your setup. Unfortunately, the system that we're testing does not support unit test or system test well enough. And that's a major drawback in this scenario. I wish it was differently, because I also want to test isolated parts. But, yeah, in this case, we have to stick with end-to-end testing. And that's also, because we had end-to-end testing automated, we called that emergency issue. If we had it isolated, then all the input and output was either fake or stopped and always true. So you still need the end-to-end testing for that part.
Yeah, but you could have like API testing, for example.
You could have that, but the system doesn't support API testing.
Yeah, you speak like boxes which.
No, I mean there's a lot of integration, different systems, and every system has communication with another system. So on that level, I can imagine technical tests like API testing or web service testing.
That as well, but for API, for this testing, you testing like APIs to the external system, you still need to have your state of your warehouse or your WMS, and we can't put that through an API. We have to do that by the user interface, because there are so many tables and business rules involved. You can't mimic that.
Yeah, I was wondering, do you also have some tools for recording the production situation, like if you have some issues, to record the actual inputs, outputs, what actually happens?
I don't have personally access to the production environment. We do have extensive logging and tracing on there that helps us recreate the issue, but most of the time mostly it is input by the end user.
But most of the time the problem what I have with logging is that you don't have the actual input and output anymore, it's just logging, it's not correlated. So how, do you have any thoughts about that, to improve it or?
No, not really. As I said, I'm not involved in the production environment, I don't have access to it, so I'm sorry I can't give an answer to that.
Any more questions? Yeah.
Thank you. I have two questions actually. The first one is about some numbers. So what was the size of the system in terms of lines of codes and the test coverage, both from the functionality perspective, how much of the requirements that you covered and how much of the code is covered by that one? And the second thing is actually a simple question. Have you applied, beside automatic testing, I actually believe the strength of the peer reviews a lot. And did you consider applying a peer review in your development processes?
To start with the first question about metrics and coverage, the system that we are testing, the system on the test, is not created in Java. I don't have access to the code base. It's an Oracle project. It is a lot of SQL statements and 4GL language. It's very hard to make a code coverage of that in terms of numbers. Even that, I'm not sure if a coverage percentage gives you any information on what you have tested. Like you have code coverage, you have conditions that you can test, your decisions. There are so many levels on which you can calculate your coverage. That's why we stick to risk-based testing. Which part of the system do we use the most in the warehouse? Can you please repeat your second question?
It's about peer review, so it's not automatic, but the developers actually put something to their development procedure about checking each other's code.
We do have code reviews, and the testing is done by an external, by another developer. So we do have checks on that.
Thank you very much for all the questions. If you have more after Ingmar is still here, and I suggest we do a break of 10 minutes now, And then we'll come back with a story from PostNL, internet.